we're putting in only 251 microwatts. 251 microwatts and about 480 watts out. So as you can see, we have quite a power factor gain. As a matter of fact, the gain right now is approaching 1,500,000. This is May the 16th, 1987, at the home of the inventor, Mr. Floyd Sweet. And this is the incredible Vacuum Triode, which organizes and gates energy directly from the vacuum itself, producing usable, practical power.
John, not many people know that you spent a lot of time working with Floyd Sweet, and I see that you've got the Sweet device out on the table. Are you going to tell us something about your work with Floyd on the device?
That's correct. I was the first to work with Floyd Sweet because basically I saved him from 3 or 4 different people that at the time were trying to steal his Vacuum Triode box. Of course, that wasn't the name of the box. It was the Sweet device, and there really was no name for it. The name comes about because Tom Bearden actually gave the box the name. But this is the actual prototype box, plastic. These are the coils that I wound for Floyd Sweet. Trigger coils, this one here, and the power coils, this one here. And this is what the box was originally. And there's quite a story behind this box in that typically Floyd would have these 2 little wires you see here.
Oh, really thin filament wires.
Yeah, these were like number 27 or something. Closer to 30. But, and this was the power coil that went to the aluminum box that had the car bulbs in it that you see in the film. This is the original box, the phenolic box that Floyd had built.
What do you mean by phenolic?
It's plastic.
Oh, okay.
It's a phenolic
Phenol
plastic.
80.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, when I entered the picture, Floyd was being sort of driven crazy by 2 guys from, one was from Australia and one was from Switzerland. And what these 2 guys brought into the picture was that they had discovered this mineral that when you take the 2 pieces of mineral and you put them into distilled water, then it ran a little motor. So they were going to make, but somehow they got connected up with Floyd, and I was talking to Floyd one night, and he says, John, these guys are threatening me. So I said, okay, I'm coming over. And I went over, and of course then I was in my younger days. And I had a long talk with these 2, and they left. And Floyd started to divulge what was in the box, because he always had this stuff all over the kitchen table. And this and that. Now I want to make a point here. This is my story may be a little bit different because I worked with Floyd from the beginning, where Floyd knew nothing of Tom Bearden in the beginning, but he did know Walt Rosenthal, because Walt Rosenthal was making little contraptions for him, like a little generator that you would connect to these 2 wires, and you'd spin this little generator by hand, and then it would charge a capacitor in the circuit, and then it would run a little oscillator, and then I never seen that work, and I have to say that I never seen that little generator work. But I think what I want to do is I'm gonna, while I'm explaining the box, I think I'm going to continue on with the story, because
Well, just one question. You say when you first started working with Floyd, approximately when would that have been? 1987, 6?
yeah, somewhere around there, 85, 86, 87, 88.
That would have been in probably in Sherman Oaks in Southern California.
Right, because I used to drive from Selmar. I'd ask him the night before what it was that he needed, and sometimes it was capacitors, sometimes it was resistors, sometimes it was a TV set. Of course, I never knew what all the items were going to be used for until I came the next night. So on a couple occasions he said, can you wind these coils for me? And I went back to the shop and made a jig, and I wound these power coils here and these trigger coils to them. And I think this was about, the trigger coil was about 270 turns of this fine wire, the exact length of this box, and the coil had to fit right down the center of this magnet where you see these little, see right down the center of the magnet here, because a little bit too far this way and the field's incorrect for it. And we're going to get into this in a minute, from what I know. But they had to fit precisely. And then he was only interested in driving car lamps at the time, which was a 14 volt output. So there's only, they were 1 volt per turn with his box. So of course the trigger was in milliamps, actually microamps when he got done, that you could read on the meter. And so we'll just go into a little bit on the box here on the board of what the arrangement of the box was. And what Floyd did was he took a magnet, and we're going to assume that the dotted line is the plastic box. So the power coil being horizontal this way, and the trigger coil being vertical this way. Now, typically, this would be north up here and south here. And north here and south here. And the only thing I could ever, when I questioned Floyd, I said, okay, this is the way I see it. Now remember, I'm new on the scene, and I'm trying to go very slow with a guy that's got many years of experience in what he was doing. So how I visualized it and would say to him at the kitchen table is that these magnets are in attraction, so the lines are basically going like this. And of course the ones coming out of the top are typically going like this. And I always used to say to Floyd, well, that's great if it's just stationary, right? And you're not going to do a damn thing with it. So he said, oh no, this is, God gave me this idea. That was the thing that popped up the first time, was God told me what to do, which was, in my mind, a total out and out lie, because You know, later on it was found out that Floyd worked with Gabriel Kron and people like that that had expertise in this field that went way beyond what they were teaching our scientific people in universities. So I'm just going to erase this and I'm going to redraw these lines. Well, that's just like in school. You break the chalk. Here. So these lines, so knowing that the trigger coil is taking up the center of one of these lines. You see, it's very, if you look at the coil, it's just on one line here, right dead in the center of the magnet. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is something very strange here on the board is I'm going to show you something with a magnet. We're just going to use one magnet. And remember, in all my drawings throughout everything, when people look through the energy groups and they look through some of the drawings that are always drawn by me, I have a way of looking at these magnets. Probably no other would look this way at them. But right straight through here, at an angle, it's a zero field. That means the lines are coming out this way and coming around like this. And those familiar with my films and my engineering notes and drawings will see that I always have these marked as zero. Now you're going to say, well, what's zero, John? Now I'm going to say that zero is where the vacuum energy enters and then is expelled. So if we're looking at it, we're looking at the magnet like this. So, what I have to say to you about this is that this is the vortex entering, and this is the vortex escaping, and this is the vortex entering, and this is the one being expelled. So if there's any negative energy at all, it's where they all come together, and it's going to be in this area in here. So that's about as scientific as I want to go with that explanation right at this time, because you have to understand how I was trying to view it, and to go into why I'm trying to view it this way is not important at this time. What is important at this time is, what did Floyd Sweet do to get energy out of this box with permanent magnets? Well, if we know that this is zero, and we know that this is a north pole on the magnet here and the south pole on the magnet here, we do know that the blotch wall is right through here. So if you have a permanent magnet, and it's a cylinder magnet, at a slight angle through here is the blotch wall. And it's actually a cross. When you look at it, it's actually a cross like this. 0, 0, 0, 0. Meaning that nothing is there. It's space. It's infinite. So you have the blotch wall here, you have the blotch wall here. You have space entering here, and space entering here, and space entering here, and space entering here. And then where the field comes around, there's a null right here where the magnetic indicator will just go to 0, and that's across the blotch wall. So, knowing that, by the way, these were my questions to Floyd Sweet, and let me tell you something about Floyd Sweet. Floyd Sweet was a magnetic expert. There is no doubt about it. He had a master's degree and a PhD in this and that, and of course that was very well hidden until the end. And he did write papers, and
so he was the real deal then.
yeah, Floyd Sweet was the real deal when it came to magnetics, especially after working for General Electric all those years. So anyway, back to my lines, but that's a little bit more history on what I was asking Floyd, because I'm a young guy here, maybe 30, maybe 35, close to my 40s when this is going on. And my theory to Floyd was that if you could just take one of these lines in the magnetic field, and I'm going to give you an example of that. If you could just take one of these lines in the magnetic field, which is right here, if you were to push this and there was another one alongside of it, if you wiggle this one, the next one wiggles, and the next one wiggles, and the next one wiggles, and the same, this direction and this direction. So I knew that he had a coil right here that was vertical, along with the lines of force attracting each other, like you see them being attracted right here in the box. In other words, if you look, this is the North Pole, so you know that the South Pole's underneath. And then see there, then there's a North Pole, and so you know the South Pole's down below. Well, when you put these on the box, you can feel the attraction. So you know these lines are in attraction, and what you want to have happen is when you put a little tickler current in here, you want this magnetic field, which is vertical. In other words, the windings are going the same direction as the lines of force. You want this magnetic field to wiggle like this, just like this. And so what you want the lines of force to do is wiggle. You want to put that modulation of that wave into that magnetic line right here. And then, of course, by putting it into one magnetic line, the next magnetic line will follow, and so on, and so on, and so on, until it gets out to the magnetic field, which is following the same pattern in the normal loops of the magnet, like this. So if we're looking at the magnet, we're looking at it like this. This thing is modulating these lines, and the modulation appears out here. It's rippling. It's a rippling magnetic field. So my next question to him was, and by the way, I never got an answer from Floyd on any question that I ever answered him, so I only could assume that I was right, because when I was wrong and I said something, Floyd was all over me. Like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. And so I tried to play it very cool with what I was trying to learn, because I was a newbie at it, and it just fascinated me. So on a couple of occasions I would build the coil, Let me put the box back in here with its coils. And I'm actually going to draw it in a way that you can see it. Let's see here. So this being the power coil, and this being the trigger coil. So in a couple of sessions when I ended up over at Floyd's house, he had a very strange setup. He had a round tube and that had house wire wrapped around it. And of course he had that to an amplifier, and he would put this whole box, actually would just take a magnet off and he would hold it down inside this tube, and of course as he turned the amplifier up, the magnet would wobble inside the tube like that. But I knew that that wasn't what he was claiming was the conditioning process, because just taking this magnet and sticking it down in the tube isn't going to condition anything, because it's going to stay permanent. So I sort of dismissed that, and when he said, "Do you have an extra amplifier?" I brought him an extra amplifier and gave him the amplifier. And he always asked for specifically for an amplifier that was 100 watts. So I brought him that. And every time I'd come over, he'd be just a little bit further on this box. Like the coils would be inserted in the box. And the next time I'd come over, there would be on the top of this magnet, there would be lines drawn, not very well, but there'd be lines drawn with a pen like this, because the box is actually sitting this direction.
So he was doing this in the evenings. He had a day job.
Yeah, no, he didn't. He had a day job where he worked on his kitchen table doing electromagnetics for all the little power companies. He did power inverter transformers, the little I&E core switching power supply transformers, because he was damn good at it. You know, and then one night when I was there, he threw a book at me, which was a Radio Shack book, and he says, "Open up the book and look in the back of the book." In fact, I have the book still to this day. And in the back of the Radio Shack book was every symbol in mathematics known, like delta, phi, everything. And he says, "Learn all that now." So I said, "Well, I already know what some of these, you know, because I use them in the power amplifiers at work and things like that." And he says, "Well, I don't care what you know." He said, "You don't know enough." So every time that I would come back with something that he requested, like a capacitor, or he'd say, "Okay, what's this symbol here and what's the mathematical formula for it?" And I'd have to tell him. And so, you know, when Floyd got into vector analysis and the scalars of vector and everything, I had to learn exactly what that was, what that meant. And so I was there one night, and here's the funny thing. I'd given him these coils, and I'd given him the trigger coil, and he had asked for a generator, so I brought a generator over, and this box was already sitting in his back room, and it was hooked these two wires here were hooked to 4 car lights. And he says, he said to me, he says, hook up the generator right there. He says, and throw the switch and turn the generator on. And so I turned it on, and immediately, you know, I says, where do you want the generator? And he says, 1 kilohertz. So I turned it on, and I turned up the generator, and bang, the lights came on, and the more I turned it up, the brighter the lights got. And I said, where are these wires going? And he goes, and he went, there was a ball of tape in here. In other words, everything was taped up in the center of the box. You couldn't see. You could see that the wires were going somewhere, but you didn't know where those wires were going because there was an amplifier sitting back here and a capacitor, and the signal generator was going into a board where he told me to hook it, and then these 2 wires were taped up and coming out on a cord supposedly and going into that board. So, and you can see it in some of the still pictures, early pictures, that you can see a ball of tape inside there. So I was like suspicious. And I said, and he yelled at me. He said, well, you can see it, can't you? It's right there. That's where it's going. And I said, yeah, but it's going into this board, and the board's going over here, and how do I know that amplifier's not running it? You know, because it acted like an amplifier. And then he had to leave the room for a minute, and this is what I did, like anybody that was curious, like a cat. I turned the signal generator down to 10 cycles and started dialing down below 10 cycles, and the lights were pulsating and flashing like that. And I says, well, a good amplifier can go down to DC, and it's going to be flat all the way down there, all the way up to 20 kilohertz. And so I punched the button to 20 kilohertz, and the lights were much dimmer, but it was still there. They were continuous. And so I forced the dial on the generator, and it sort of, you know, only went to a certain point and stopped. It's like you couldn't turn any more signal. But when I turned the generator down to like 10 cycles or 20 cycles, and I could turn that knob all the way up and get brighter and brighter and brighter. So it seemed like to me that in this box he had a frequency response that was going like this. This being like 20 kc. And this being like 20 cycles. Because all along in here, until he returned to the room, I pushed the buttons, and those lights stayed flat. They stayed exactly the same brightness till I got to 20 kc, and then they started to fall off, the same way an amplifier would fall off.
And how long was he out of the room?
He was out of the room for about 5 minutes because he was taking care of Rose out front. That was his wife. And when he came back in the room, I had returned the generator to 1K, and the lights were on, and I was just sitting there in the chair, and I was always wondering, well, why does he have to have the amplifier in the background? What's it do? You know, why did he want the amplifier on the kitchen table? Because it's acting like what we had here was a mag amp, a magnetic amplifier, something that was known in World War II. Okay, but things got stranger because I sat and I said, actually I drew this for him on the table, and I said, I have this coil, and I said, I'm putting this magnet down inside this coil, this direction, so that north's over here and south's over here. And I said, I'm turning up the amplifier, and this thing is rocking, you know, back and forth in this direction. And he said, well, that's part of the conditioning process. And I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. You know, what are you conditioning here? You know, by doing that. I mean, you're not changing the magnet. I pull it out of there, and the magnet's not sitting out there in space and oscillating. You know, it's not vibrating, because that was not the secret of this whole thing. That was to throw John and Tom Bearden and anybody that was associated with Floyd Sweet after that completely out of the equation. So there's a guy by the name of Peter Topol who shows up on the scene, and of course he's one of these high finance guys that he was the black sheep of his family. And I can't remember right at this time what fortune he was heir to, but it was the DuPonts. I think it was the DuPonts. And so now mysterious people are showing up. And Bill Jenkins is there from KBC Radio, and they're making this deal. And, you know, what happened was I was asked to come over there in the afternoon by Peter Topol, who now is a part of the whole thing after I've built all these things and given him TV sets and
Give him Floyd TV sets.
Yeah. And so then I started to put two and two together at night in my shop when he said, well, go and make a box yourself. And so I bought barium ferrite magnets like these right here. I've had these put away for years. In fact, they're still in the same packages. I had a couple of different sets. And I couldn't quite, I'd go back to my shop and I'd follow his directions. And his directions were very simple. You put the magnet with the North Pole up, South Pole, box, north, south. His trigger coil, of course, vertical, and the power coil horizontal. Well, here's the trick. He said, this is exactly what he said. He said, you put the magnets on the box like this, and you hook this to your signal generator, and you feed in 60 hertz. And then it was much simpler after that, because he said, you charge a capacitor to 100 volts or 200 volts, and just at the right time, you have a push button switch. And you go bang. And that imparts the charge. See, the magnet's already oscillating. I got that far with in some of the things you see some metal sitting on top of the magnet like this. And you see a couple of pieces like this. And
Shim stock.
Yeah, well, laminations.
Okay.
And then when you turn this generator on, you can watch these laminations vibrate when the magnet hits resonance. Oh, I did that for night after night after night after night after night. And finally I brought my box to Floyd, and he said, well, you did something wrong, right? So I left the box there. And I said, well, you can have the box, Floyd. Glad I could help you. Anything you want me to do for you? And I took off. And I came back the next night, and he says, come on in my room. He says, I want you to see your box. And I went back into the room, and he says, here, turn up the generator. By then he had test equipment. And he got the test equipment from an old boss of mine when I was going through school called Al Margolis, who was a guy that repaired test equipment and ran quite a successful business at test equipment. So I recognized the test equipment because they had the certification symbol on the piece of equipment, and I said, "Oh, I know who that is because I used to work for him when I was going through school." Al Margolis. And now Al Margolis is in the picture, all right, and Peter Topol's in the picture by now. Tom Bearden's in the picture by now, but they're not there night after night. They're only talking to Floyd by telephone. So the next thing I noticed, he says, "Come on in the room. Look at your box." I went back there. He says, "Turn up the generator," and sure as crap, the lights came on, and nobody's home. You know, that's what it seemed like to me. And I waited for him to leave the room. Rose yelled to him from the living room, and I waited for him to leave the room, and I hit the generator buttons again, and it did identically the same thing again. At 20 hertz it did this, at 1 kilohertz it did this, and at 20 kc it went down the other way. Well, it wasn't my house, and I was always very polite with people because their equipment's their equipment, and you should never touch others' equipment when they're giving you a demonstration or something like that. You should always just ask questions if that's what you're going to do. So I waited, but I could never figure out, in my mind, why is the amplifier always in the background? Why is this amplifier in the background? And so when I was looking in the room, I'm looking at the generator here. I'm looking at the box up front up here with this tape ball of wires going to this little hookup board right here. And the wires from this generator going somewhere. And then the scope. And then the damn amplifier sitting in the background with the heat sinks on this side. And all these wires are going somewhere. But it's not my place, and it wasn't my place, and I wasn't going to just, wait for the guy to go out of the room and then sneak behind his back and try to find out where all these wires were going, because it's not my house. So I said to myself, I'll just ask more questions. I'll just, and maybe he needs some more coils wound or something like that. And so, yeah, he did. And so I wound some more coils for him. And I noticed one thing then on one of the nights that I was there. And what I noticed was he had a GE toaster oven, like that you make toast in, that you pull out the little drawers on. And I noticed that was sitting, it wasn't where it normally was when I walked into his kitchen. It was always against the wall where a toaster would be, alongside the sugar bowl and all this stuff in a normal kitchen. And I noticed it was sitting out on the table that we usually sat at. So I asked the dumb question. I said, "Gee, Floyd, what's the toaster oven? Shouldn't the toaster oven be over there?" He says, "Oh, no." So I was using it for an experiment. I said, "Oh, what were you doing?" And then he just got silent. And he said, "Come on, I want to show you something." And he dropped the subject. We went in the back room, and he says, "Here." He says, "This is why I want the color TV sets." And so what he would do was he'd take this magnet and he'd hold it up to the color TV set to look at the field around the magnet. Now, why was he doing that? Because he had two magnets laying in the room, and Rose called to him, and he says, here, take the magnet and put it on the TV set. So I took that magnet and I put it on the TV set, and of course, you know, a color TV set, the screen gets destroyed when you do that. But I don't think Floyd cared, because it was one of the TV sets that I gave him that didn't get any channels anyway. So I noticed that it showed up, you know, where the rings, when you're looking at it, that the magnet that I had, you know, the rings were in a certain position. They were sort of, not sort of circle like this, but they were sort of bent. Like this. But there was another magnet sitting over on the other side that was about the same as this, so I grabbed that magnet and I put the other magnet down and I put it up to the screen, and there was no bends in here. It was just some kind of weird pattern coming out on the screen. And I'm not drawing this precisely. I'm just giving you what I've seen. It's kind of hard to explain or remember exactly what it was that I seen. But I remember the two magnets being totally different from each other on this screen. So when he came back in the room, I said, oh, this is really interesting, Floyd, but what's the toaster oven for? And he says, well, he says, I wanted to heat up the magnet and try and experiment with the magnet to see if it loses its magnetism. So I didn't think anything about that. Trained by DeVry Institute of Technology. What the hell would I care if he wanted to put a magnet in a toaster oven? So I didn't think anything about it. But later on that night, when I went back home, I started looking. I kept looking in the books on magnets at home about ferrite magnets. And I found out that ferrite magnets have a cure temperature of like 160 or 170, 180 degrees, whatever this toaster oven could do. And I said, oh. I said, he's trying to make it non-magnetic for some reason for a certain amount of time. And I said to myself, maybe that's how he's programming it. He is heating the magnet up and then putting it in the coil and then turning up the amplifier and trying to impress this 60 cycles so that the magnet is always in perpetual oscillation. And I said that to myself. So I brought it up the next time that I was at Floyd's. By then, Tom Bearden is heavily on the scene, and they're talking on the phone, and they come up with the term, and I think Tom came up with it, vacuum triode. And they always drew it, like a tube. And was the vacuum triode.
Vacuum Triode Amplifier.
Yeah.
VTA.
Yeah, VTA. Well, it wasn't the VTA in the beginning. It was just the Sweet device that God gave him. So, I said, well, God told me to, and so I said, well, what's the circuit? I said to him one night, and he drew the circuit, and he put this diode in there from one coil to the next coil, and he says, God told me to do that. Of course, as this story goes on, you're going to find out that Floyd Sweet might have not been Floyd Sweet, but so I just left it alone. I wasn't going to question anymore about that because I was already perplexed by what I'd seen with the toaster oven. I was thinking about, well, why would somebody want to put these magnets in a toaster oven? What good would that do? And so I started to research this, and I'd start to get into the question with Floyd Sweet, and he'd say, oh, by the way, you want a piece of fruit? Go over there and get a banana, it's good for you. And so I'd walk over there and get a banana and sit down at the table, and I'd say, well, gee, what do you need the toaster oven for? And he'd say, we'll get into that later, but let me show you this right now. And then we'd go back in his room, and of course he didn't have a box running. The box was there, but it wasn't running. And he'd say, oh, look, I converted the TV set. Have you ever seen cycloids? And I said, what are you talking about, Floyd? And he had the TV set. Of course, the normal picture tube in the TV set is not round, but I'm just going to draw it round. And he said, watch this. And he'd hit the generator, and a dot would start here, and that dot, when you hit a frequency, would make, it would just go around the TV screen like that, and he'd say change the frequency, and then the dot would come over here and go around this way. He says, oh, I'll show you how to make that. That's easy to make. He says, have you ever seen cycloids? And I said, no. Because I said, I've seen Lissajous patterns for oscilloscopes, and I've had to read those my entire life because of the phasing of the amplifiers and everything. He said, well, that's not like that. He says, these are cycloids. He says, the frequencies are moving. And he said, sometimes he could get a frequency, set where there'd be cycloids going like one this direction and one that direction, and some other one bouncing around the screen like this out here. And he says, oh, that's very important. He says, you want to know exactly what each frequency does, because that's how it's going to affect the magnetic field. And I thought to myself for a minute, I says, okay, I'm open-minded. I'll believe him. So he says, oh, let me show you how to make that machine. So he did. He showed me how to convert a TV set, and I made one at the lab. And I played with it for a while, but I could not relate in my own head how each one of these frequencies spun around and made a different shape at a different frequency, because I was used to, if I put this frequency in there, I'm getting this phase, and if I do that, then I'm getting this phase, and and then I'm getting this here. And so it took me a while to understand that what he was actually showing me was a way that they might have looked at frequencies in General Electric when they were looking at motor windings and things at different frequencies. And so I still, in my own head, I couldn't comprehend on the hell is he talking about when he's what's the toaster oven doing? They kept coming back to the toaster oven. And then finally I came to the conclusion that what he was doing was he was heating up the magnet to bring it down to a cure temperature so that he could get into the domains of the magnet some frequency that had to do with these cycloids. Of course, out there now, nobody has this machine that Floyd made. Nobody even knows how to make that machine.
Which machine are you talking about?
The cycloid machine out of the old TV, so that he could look at the frequencies. And so, to this day, nobody has looked at frequencies like Floyd Sweet looked at the frequencies. Everybody's holding the magnet up to the TV screen to see what the hell's going on with the magnetic field in this magnet. And they're thinking that that has something to do with how Floyd did it. Well, that's very untrue. That's not how Floyd did it. Floyd was looking at something completely different. First of all, he was looking at the cure temperature of this magnet. And then, what was he using the extra TV set for that he told me to stay away from with the two metal plates on it? So I finally said to myself, he is taking this magnet and he's bringing it to the cure temperature, and between the box, you know, because I went over there one time, and what was funny was I didn't see this with my own eyes, but I smelled it. I smelled ozone in the room. And so that sort of said to me, wait a minute, he's using high voltage for something in here. What the hell is he using high voltage for? And so the only thing that I could ever figure in my mind, and when I questioned about this, Tom Bearden came to me a week later and said, Floyd doesn't want you to come over here anymore. Floyd wants you to never come over again. And I said to myself, well, okay, Tom, that's fine with me. It sort of hurt my feelings, but I never let on to any of them. And the funny thing was, you know, a guy that boots you out, because you're just asking a question, he boots you out, and then after he boots you out, you know, he sends Tom Bearden back over, and Tom Bearden begs me for a couple of capacitors and another TV set. So you got to think to yourself, hey, Tom, I'm your friend. I'm your friend forever. You know, yeah, tell him here, take the TV set, go. Right? So Tom Bearden, as big as he was, he did, you know, he just grabbed it like a bear and away he went. So then I put two and two together in my lab, but I left a little piece out here, and I have to back up just a little bit because I want to cover the whole story. Tom Bearden brought Sparky to my lab, and I was working on something that had to do with PWM.
Pulse width modulation.
Yeah, pulse width modulation, and I was showing them, you know, how I was taking the audio signals and turning it to PWM and then filtering it out and playing the music through the speakers, which was a Class D amplifier. And of course, when Sparky seen that, he just turned white and he went the other direction. But there was one other thing too. In one of these, if you bought the other DVDs, you saw me demonstrate the G-field generator, which was the gravity wave converter. And I had brought that and shown that to Sparky, and he had just turned like, he just melted, and he said, well, I guess my flux alternator isn't going to make it anymore. You know, because he was working on a space flux alternator at the time, which he was getting paid very handsomely for, and he had neo-magnets before their time, cut and polished that were at certain shapes and everything, which was a really expensive deal. And so I just wanted to back up just a little bit to tell you those two little items before I was booted. And I was booted. It was, and I kept saying to Tom Bearden, I never really brought it up that much to Tom because I know Tom was, you know, wanted to see something come out there and empower the world and all this stuff, but I sort of in the end put two and two together, saying that, you know, he had these aluminum plates like this that went off to the TV set, and he had the generator over here and the coil, and he had a Walt Rosenthal built him a zero crossing switch so he could dump this right at the zero cross, this capacitor, right at the zero cross. Right there. So he could dump this pulse at 2 milliseconds right at the zero cross between this 60 hertz and this.
Here's the magnet conditioning stuff for Floyd's. These are the two conditioning magnets, conditioning coils. And I built this assembly right here, and the circuit board that controlled this big power SCR here, which dumped the thing. Basically, I just ganged 3 great big electrolytic capacitors together with copper bus bars that are 1/4 inch thick and 1/2 inch wide, and wired that into the SCR, and from there, from the SCR into these coils. And this is the one that I could adjust exactly to the zero crossing. So when he'd push the button, it would only fire it, and precisely fire it right at the zero crossing.
But at the same time, these magnets were heated while he was doing this. So that may be a little more insight into those working on the Sweet device, because this actually, what this actually is the same thing that was done in Nazi Germany called the Schaappeller device. It was nothing more than I thought of it being a Schaappeller device during World War II when the Nazis were trying to develop UFOs. But let me just...
Who was Schaappeller?
Schaappeller was a scientist that worked for the Germans during World War II. And how Schaappeller ever ended up going from a pauper to owning a castle is beyond anybody's comprehension. But that's not the point. The point was Schaappeller had a third law to thermodynamics, which he said existed, and that the common people were only to know the 2 laws, the first and the second, because that's the way things worked, when in all reality there's probably a 3rd and 4th law that counters the 2nd law of thermodynamics. So anyway, I have to back you up just for an instant, because I want to bring you back to a few little incidents that took place during this Sweet incident. And one of those things was that when Tom Bearden was heavily involved in this, I was called one afternoon because Sparky couldn't drive for some reason, or he had no gas in his car, as usual. But he called me, and I came over there. I wasn't quite booted out yet. I was booted out after this. And he said, Tom Bearden, he says, we got to take Rose up to the hospital. Rose has to go to the hospital. So I says, oh, fine. So we all got in my car, and I drove around the corner of the hospital. But this is what was very strange is, why would Floyd Sweet go into the hospital, and when they asked who this person was, which is supposedly Floyd's wife, why would he say, it's just my sister? So it's kind of strange that he lied right in front of us about this.
So he took his wife to the hospital. They asked him...
I drove him around the corner with Tom Bearden sitting in that car, and he specifically went in there and told the guy that wasn't his wife, it was his sister. And that was a plain lie, because the whole time Tom is there and the whole time I'm there, it's his wife, and he has to run out and take care of her. So he did all the shopping, he did all the cooking, he did all this. And then after all his stuff was done during the day, I would come back over there at night, and he would tell me what he needed on his little shopping list for electronics and stuff, and then I would put it together that night and then bring it over the next day. But then there's one other incident that just didn't quite make sense. I get this frantic call one night from Floyd, and he says, "You got to come over here right away. They just tried to kill me." And I said, "They did what?" And he says, "Well, they just tried to kill me. I started to go down my steps, and I heard this gunshot, and it hit the wall, and he showed me right there in the wall, as if I just moved over to the wall, there was a bullet hole right in the plaster, like the plaster had been knocked out." Now, I've been there many nights before, so there never was, at the doorway, was that piece of plaster knocked out. And it looked like some object had hit that. So I said, "Well, I'll stay with you, Sparky, for a while, you know, until Rose falls asleep," or whatever it was. But meanwhile, before I got booted, I kept questioning about this toaster oven and about the TV set and about why the cycloids and all this stuff. So anyway, I came to the conclusion that it was very close to the Chappeller device, which was done during World War II, which ended up being something that they called glowing magnetism. And the glowing magnetism was taking place inside this ball in the center. And it's where the magnetic fields come together. So, in other words, it's exactly where the blotch wall ends up on the magnet is where the glowing magnetism appears. And the only reason that it would end up here is if this thing was a spatial electret, and that when they energized it, it caused the vacuum energy to be sucked in, and then of course the output from that in the Chappeller device would have been anti-gravity. But that's not what I've seen here when I played with this device that Sweet had. I had never seen the device, no matter how hard I turned the generator, ever lift up off the table, ever cause any buzzing in the room. And believe me, when I held it with my hands like this, it was the same weight. So whatever he told Tom Bearden was just a story to get Tom Bearden to keep working on this device with him. Of course, unfortunately, during this whole time, the Peter Topels and the Bill Jenkinses and the Al Margolises all ended up in a fight. But I was gone. I was booted. I was at my shop. But there was one other incident where Sparky had said, "Now I got the thing to 1,000 watts." And Tom had actually conditioned this himself. He had, by accident, pushed the switch on the machine, which was this zero crossing switch that I'm talking about. And the box started up, and Tom Bearden was, I think if I would have been Tom Bearden and I would have pushed the button, that I would have been totally amazed at this. And of course, then I would have been a firm believer because I had started the box up and made it run. But so Tom worked his little hide off, you know, with Sparky Sweet, and writing all kinds of papers and things like that, explanations on conditioning and circuits and all this stuff. But I had figured that out. I had figured out what Sparky did was he had heated these magnets to the cure temperature, so there was basically no magnetism there. And while they were in that condition, he was tickling them. And then at the right instant, he jolted this power coil under high voltage. So it was being conditioned with a high voltage here and a high voltage here, like plus, minus. It had to be a DC voltage. So I'd come to the conclusion that what Floyd Sweet was doing was building a electrek that was going to use this glowing magnetism, because I think if someday that we'll all find out that General Electric knew all about this just after Tesla, because they had the funds and they had buried Tesla and they had buried Westinghouse and they had hired Gabriel Kron and of course Floyd Sweet, who Floyd Sweet was Gabriel Kron's, you would call it today in slang, a lackey.
Protege.
Well, you would...
Intern.
You would say it like a... You can say it any way you want, but the point is he was underneath them. And when Sparky threw me the book and said, learn all these formulas, that's exactly what Gabriel Kron did to Sparky. And Gabriel Kron sent him through school to learn higher mathematics, because I think the project that they were working on was far more advanced than what the public knew General Electric was capable of doing. Because I think they were going to tap this space energy using this glowing magnetism. Because once you had that, then it would be very easy for things to rotate out here. You know, and it would seem like and the vacuum itself that Tom talks about, the space energy, the stuff that comes to us every day, you could amplify this through this device, and you could do what you wanted to do with it because it was automatic. But there was one little effect that seemed to bother Floyd, and Tom indicated that earthquakes, if you shorted the output, that the machine went dead. And I kind of believe that, because this was one of those electrets, as long as you left it alone and the gravitational field didn't move or anything funny happened, well, it would just continue to output its power, you know, for this very small amount of input. Because remember, as I said in all the films that we've generated over the years and all the lab notes, that you always need this little trigger signal. And this can be very minute, you know, and then of course this little trigger signal being so minute, right, after it does what it has to do, the output signal then is very big compared to it. So if you took exactly what you were putting in this little signal and divided it by what this signal was, you would find out that you probably had 300 to 400%. But in Floyd's case, it might have been 5,000%. That's how much gain that Floyd had, because if he was putting microvolts in here after the conditioning process, which is far less than milliamps for those that don't know, then the gain was terrific on this device.
Because he had it sort of plugged in out the back door.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it was constantly drawing in all the energy. And but once again, I want to make quite clear to everybody that early on, and we're talking about 2 or 3 months, that I probably was getting so close to the way that this machine operated that Floyd had to get rid of me. And so that's, even though my feelings were hurt, and Tom Bearden had to come to me and tell me, you're not welcome there anymore, you can't come over there anymore. And I was like, I didn't know what to say. I just said, well, okay, Tom, if that's the way everybody feels. Although I was hurt.
What was the reason he gave?
He didn't give me a reason.
Yeah.
He never gave me a reason. He just said, Floyd Sweet. I called him Sparky, and everybody else called him Sparky.
Yeah.
So Tom was actually in Southern California at that time?
Yes. Yes, Tom was making frequent visits to Floyd's because Tom wanted proof. Mm-hmm. And Tom, when Sparky got the final big box done, Tom says, well, I just don't want to have it work at your place, Floyd. He says, I'm going to call up John. I want to take it over there to the lab. And I remember this very vividly because Tom Bearden told me afterwards that the box was running at his place. It was capable by then of doing 1,000 watts. That's quite a bit out of a little box that's small, and that he had, Floyd had come up with a way to control the feedback in the box so that once he started it, it generated its own signal, and therefore he didn't need the generator or anything anymore. And so I remember that night, it was about, I'd say 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and I was doing something at the shop. I always worked till 3 or 4 in the morning. And I get this phone call, and it's Tom Bearden, and he says, John, he says, Floyd has just finished his biggest, meanwhile, Tom's still talking to me. But we just don't discuss Floyd. And I always made it like it didn't bother me, but it did, because I worked so hard to do it, you know. So I says, yeah, no problem, Tom. You can bring the box over and you can use my generator and you can hook it up. And I've got the lights right here. We'll just hook the lights to it and see if it works. I wasn't going to look in the box or take the box apart or anything because it wasn't my box. So so he brings the box over.
Tom does.
Yeah, Tom, he drives over there with Peter Topol. I think it was Peter Topol or Bill Jenkins. And they say, okay, John, hook up the box. Meanwhile, Tom's calling Floyd on the phone. He's talking to him on the phone, and he says, and so Floyd gets on the phone and he says to me, just hook up the generator to those 2 little inputs and turn up the generator, and it should work fine. But Tom said that when Floyd disconnected the box, before he handed it to him, he shorted the box out. Simple, right? I knew that when Floyd shorted out the box, that box wasn't going to operate. But I did it. I did it to just go along with the program, even though I wasn't invited to the party anymore. So I hook up the box, I hook up the lights, I say, I'm not going to turn the dial, you turn the dial, Tom, there it is. That's exactly what he said to do on the phone. Tom turned the dial, no lights. So then he calls Floyd Sweet back up and he says, well, you guys must have did something wrong. Because Tom had told me, you know, he says, he shorted it out before he gave it to me. Now I know why. So Tom knew that he just wanted to be convinced in his own mind that this guy wasn't going to prove anything to anybody. You know?
You mean?
Well, he wasn't going to prove it to Tom. He wasn't going to let it be taken out of his area and work. Because one other time, and I have to backtrack just a bit. I'm ready to go on my vacation. We had scheduled a vacation to go to Lake Havasu, and he was worried that somebody was getting in his apartment, breaking in while they were sleeping. Because I'm thinking to myself, you know, you'd have to hear somebody coming into this apartment because it's a really thick door, and you're not going to get in these windows without breaking them. And I says, okay, Floyd, what do you want me to do? And he says, I want you to come and hide this box. He says, and you can use it if you want. And I said, well, okay, fine. I'm going on vacation. I'll run it aboard the boat. Right? Because we were going to Lake Havasu.
So the concept being that the box would be self-powering.
Yeah, no, I had a generator.
Oh, okay.
I had a little, at that time they came out with what they called the 8038, which was a little function generator that had enough voltage to do what this box needed to have done. And so...
To put out additional power.
Yeah, so I said, okay. And I came over and I got the box and I took it back to the lab. And of course I would, you know, curiosity always kills the cat. So I took that box and I hooked it up to my generator and lights didn't come on. I said, it's typical. You know, he shorted out this box. And I said to myself, this is worthless. I'm not going to take this box aboard the boat. So I just, true to my word, I locked it in the safe in the shop. And that's where it stayed until I came back off the vacation, at which time I picked up the box and returned it to Floyd. But this wasn't the only occasion. He would just tell you stories somehow, like how to do this and how to do that, and then you'd find out that that's not at all how you would do it. You know, so it's my recollection to this day that what this was a highly space-charged electret.
So once he shorted out the box, he had to do something to make
Well,
it
he
work.
would, before he would disconnect the box, he'd leave this signal on these two wires,
Right.
and while it was under its load, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, before you could see, I mean, he was pretty quick at how he did this.
Right.
He would touch the two wires together and it'd flash,
Okay, but then,
and that would kill the electret.
so then what did he have to do to make it functional again?
He had to recondition the magnets again. He had to go back through the toaster oven. He had to go back through the high voltage. Because once you short out the box or the load's too extreme for the box, it kills the electret. Because remember, an electret is a potential device.
Okay.
So as long as it's drawing in the energy where it needs to draw it in, you know, and believe me, Pat, it doesn't make any difference what people think of this story or not. For the simple fact is, not one of them has a working box to this day.
Now that answered the question, because like, when you had that drawing up on the board, and you talked about the high voltage top and bottom coming in, and I thought, well, how long does that last? And I guess it lasts till you short it out.
Yeah. So anyway, to sort of give an example, these are notes that the world has never seen. And if you'll notice, they say on them, close hold. And these are what the contracts and agreements when we were all in this together, and what he told us to do. And I would go home at night and make lab notes like I've always done of what I thought was going on in the box. And how to condition this box and what these waves were actually doing. And where I found the zero portions. Can you get that there, Tony?
Yep. Keep it still.
And by the way, what's this date say here?
August 24th, 1986.
So that's about the time
Yeah.
that, and then all of a sudden it appears to be a vacuum triode assembly and conditioning. Proprietary information, close hold. And there it's shown. But the magnets are drawn wrong. Tom receives the wrong information. The magnets are drawn wrong. But the circuit's correct. But I'm booted by then. And remember I told you about the big coil, the conditioning coil? So they construct this big coil that they put the magnets in. And then it shows the conditioning setup, but that's wrong.
So this isn't your...
No, these are not my drawings. These are the information that Walt's receiving and Tom Bearden's receiving.
Yeah.
See, I'm drawing the box, and I'm not really a good artist, but I'm drawing the box the way I was told.
Yeah.
There's quite a difference there. I'm told to use a light bulb across the cap. So, the only conclusion that and then I'm told to do this with the zero voltage switch. 2/17/1986. Then here, I'm told to hook up this for the magnets this way. Excuse me, using this for the center tap this time.
So these are... You can really measure in writing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm writing this down.
Right.
And I'm told where to switch. You can see where he's looking for the wave in the magnet here, that it's altering these domains. See?
Yeah.
And he's telling me to use 15 hertz. And to orient it this way in the box. "90 degrees, this equals 0 force. Time shift to power plus magnet force." Okay, the magnetic domains are lined up like this, and when you condition the magnetic domains are moving to make up this sine wave, like this. So see, they're all in here
So they follow the curve.
to make up this sine wave, and then of course when you put the tickler current in, this magnet goes into resonance and the magnetic field modulates the power coil. which is this red coil. Of course, Tom Bearden the whole time is receiving a completely different. Floyd's using Tom Bearden. Now, Floyd's a mathematician working with Gabriel Kron. Why does he need Tom Bearden to do the math? Here, Tom's doing this math. And doing these models. It says right on there.
Bearden. 87, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then here's a description about, this is in Floyd Sweet's writing. He gives me this and he says, this is what I want you to do. Here it is. Go ahead and read that, Tony. Can you read that? Or Pat, maybe you could read this.
No, she's hooked up.
No.
Charging.
I'll bring it to her and she can read it. And I'll show you the rest here. Okay. What's he say right here that he's doing?
Charging the caps through the power coil relaxes magnetic domains and establishes a new magnetic moment. This occurs only at the start of IRC,
Right.
when T equals 0 plus 1, as the current falls rapidly and the charging voltage rises rapidly on the curve. Number T, or and T, 5 RC, is that T5 RC?
Yeah.
Steady starts, exists full voltage, is a
Across the
across
cap.
the cap, yeah.
Right. As the current
Is charging during,
charging and discharging, the power coil exhibits inductance
right,
at delta T. So right here he's given a full set of instructions of how he conditioned it. But when you go to use this set of instructions, it doesn't work. And then he drew his own circuit, which follows my circuit. He just drew it a little bit differently here.
so how did you get all these? He sent them to you himself?
I was part of the whole.
Oh, you were part of it that time, yeah. Right.
But I was booted out and they never, I was asked never to work on the device again, and I've never worked on this device ever again.
Right.
Because, you know, having one thing and talking about it in a film is not making it.
Right.
So I feel that if I couldn't, you know, reproduce the box myself, that something was going on there that I didn't know about and wasn't privileged to. And so that's about what I can tell you about Floyd Sweet. You know, no disrespect to the man, he may have had something, and I'm sure Tom Bearden really believed him.
As did Walt Rosenthal,
Yes, as Walt did.
and as did a number of investors.
Right, but in the end they all lost their money.
Didn't Tom say something about the investors lost their money as well?
I don't recall. Yeah, but no, the device was never replicated. I have a question, John. There's a video out with you, with Tom in it, and Tom's narrating it, and you make a brief appearance in the corner, and the device is labeled, and it's doing 1.5 million times more power than is being put into it.
100,000 times more.
Yeah, but anyway, your thesis is that that really wasn't.
That really wasn't the case.
Yeah.
You know, because if something goes over 200% or 300% or 400%, you got a lot of power.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe with the way that those guys are calculating is they're getting 120 volts out, right? And they're only putting like 2 microamps in. That would give you some, you know, great thing. And the thing that concerns me the most about Floyd Sweet is you never know out there who's lurking in the shadows, who would want to even sue you over this information. You don't know, because Tom Bearden did get sued.
Yeah.
It cost him his savings. And why would you sue Tom Bearden? Tom Bearden was only trying to help. I'll tell you why, because they're all greedy. They're all greedy, just like the rest of them that want to steal the stuff. You know, instead of try to make it work, you know, where everybody's happy and it can get some energy or something. No, it's like the stock market. You know, raise it up and steal the people's money, and raise it up and steal the people's money. Well, sooner or later, you know, how many times can you get fooled?
And you have a big crash like right now.
Well, exactly, but the point being that I'm not here to tell a story, or don't care whether or not the Australians or the French believe me, or the Italians believe me, or any of them. I don't care. I was there. I lived it. This is what I seen. And it doesn't make any difference if they think I'm right or wrong. Because there are those that have been working secretly on this. And believe me, it's just a hobby to them. It's not their life. So they just work on it when they work on it. And yeah, they've probably done some good work, but believe me, they'll never be Floyd Sweet. You know, because even when you tell them the truth, they're not going to believe you.
John, you posited the question, was Floyd Sweet Floyd Sweet? What exactly do you mean by that?
Just what I said.
Yeah.
Was Floyd Sweet really Floyd Sweet? Was that his real name? You know, was he really for real, or was this the biggest sham that ever hit at that time? Because you couldn't take anything apart. You couldn't follow any wires. It was working when you came back. Tom Bearden was the only man I know that was successful because Tom told me he did. And I believe Tom. That he hit the button and it started up. And that very well may be true. But what was in the background running? Maybe he did hit the switch and it came on. And maybe he did get in the car, and I know he got in the car with it because he showed up at my shop. And it didn't work. Yes, yeah. Exactly.
And he spotted that.
So, was Floyd Sweet really Floyd Sweet?
Well, there was some question about his documentation
yes,
from MIT
yes,
and General
was.
Electric had disappeared.
Yes, it did disappear because he worked with Gabriel Kron. And Gabriel Kron had a lot more than people know he had. And the projects that Gabriel Kron worked on had to do with not only this negative energy, probably anti-gravity.
And teleportation.
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't privileged to any of that, but I was privileged to this.
Right.
Right here. And I think if
what was that color picture I saw in there?
oh, that's a clarifier. I think this may be Walt's drawing. Walt Baumgartner's.
Rosenthal.
Yeah, I think it's Rosenthal, right? That may be a zero cross switch right there.
Yeah.
So there it is. You have Walt Rosenthal, you have Tom Bearden, you have John Bedini, you have Al Margolis, you have Bill Jenkins of KBC Open Mind.
What happened to Al Margolis and Bill Jenkins?
I don't know. I was long gone.
But you don't know if it's
Bill
alive
Jenkins
or
to this day will not talk about it because I think he was also named
when the lawsuit.
in the suit. And when I talk about it to Bill, and I've just talked to Bill not too recently ago to see, because Bill was looking for all the old radio shows. And I said, well, gee, do you remember Peter Topol? And of course he laughs. And he says, oh yeah, one of the heirs, the black sheep to the DuPont family, right, that was going to bring all this money to Floyd, right? But did the money ever get there? No.
And Floyd also needed money for his invalid wife too, didn't he?
Yes. That was, you mean the sister or the wife? See? So who is Floyd, who was Floyd Sweet? I can only tell the truth from when I first met him to right now. And now it's dead and gone. Yeah. And I think the information is so mixed up out there that it's going to be very difficult to reproduce that box if you didn't build that box somewhere else at some other time. And of course, Tony's going to ask.
Why can't it be done?
No, Tony's going to ask, what do you mean at some other time? Well, just after World War II.
Oh.
With General Electric.
So why could you not do that right now?
You probably could if you.
There's some methodology that General Electric probably used that you really have to be privy to.
Yeah.
To get the full enchilada.
You need to know, exactly the full set of equations that don't match the equations that we have.
Okay.
And that's about what my story about Floyd Sweet is.
But just from an historic viewpoint, it's a really interesting story.
Yes.
Yeah.
I lived it. I was there.
Over what period of time? Was this about 6-month period or one
Yeah,
year?
6 months to a year.
Yeah.
It's one of those times you never forget because you're so hopeful, that you're going and you're working and you're coming back and you're working on this project, and you're not really talking. Everybody that was coming over asking about generators and magnet motors and stuff never heard a word from me about this until the internet popped up, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah. John, you mentioned something about taking it up to the curing temperature of the magnet.
Mm-hmm.
Just for those people that don't know, and this is really nothing so much to do with Floyd Sweet, but how do you create a magnet? Because I understand, I believe that...
Well, this stuff is...
No, first of all, you come out with a piece of metal, but it's not magnetic. It has to be conditioned and...
tap it in the north-south direction.
No, I mean, commercially, how is a magnet made from a...
Oh, today they pour this into a mold, and what they do is they bring it to a cure temperature. It's like an epoxy that they pour in there, and they bring it to a cure temperature, and then they magnetize it. Then they put it in the machine and magnetize it. So see, there is a cure temperature to magnetize it.
So it has to be at a certain temperature to be magnetized?
Yes. No.
No,
it has to be at a certain temperature to cure the material so it sticks together.
Okay, and then how do you magnetize it?
Then you put it in between these two coils and you go bang, like he was doing with the capacitors in here.
Okay.
So
He obviously knew something on General Electric, I'm sure, knew how to make magnets. And I'm sure that somebody stumbled upon this. That if you did this and if you did that, we may find out in the future that all these secret projects, right, that they have magnets that are self-oscillating and everything else, and all you have to do is put a coil of wire. My intentions were to, I saw it so simply, you know, that I could make a box that was like this, and then all I had to do was put this coil in between it, and by doing that, right, energy was coming out. And if I wanted one much smaller, I would just use smaller magnets to do it. And then I'd have a little bitty power supply. That was my intentions.
Now, Howard Johnson was talking about magnets, and he said they were very high quality magnets that he bought them from China, I think he said.
Oh, those are neodymium iron boron, and that has nothing to do with this,
Okay,
because these are ferrites.
Okay, but are there different qualities within the ferrites, say?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. These are number 5 magnets, and the new strontium magnets are number 8s. And there's a difference on these, because Walt Rosenthal said you could measure these.
Okay.
This is a magnet mapping apparatus that I built for Floyd. It allowed me to crank this carriage this way. I found this piece right here over at C&H one day. Found this in another surplus store. This was an extensiometer. You pull it, as you extend it, it changes, it rotates a resistor inside the box. This gives you a precise resistance reading for distance traveled. And it sat on there. And right there, which is awfully hard to see, is the actual sensor, which sits right down on the magnet face. It's just that big kind of a sensor. And then I could read it out on one of these gauges, and I could meters, and I could read out the actual position on the other one.
So really, the advice to experimenters is
Just experiment.
Forget about it. Forget about Floyd Sweet, because there's just not enough information out there.
There's not enough information at this time to
Don't waste your time.
reconstruct his work.
Yeah. And if
I'm not saying don't try.
yeah,
Try all you want.
but chances are that
You're not going to find where he was.
yeah, because you couldn't. So
Well, I could have in a little more time, but
yeah,
I wasn't given the opportunity, saying that I was asked to never work on it again. So I could have done it in overtime. I'm sure other people could do it overtime, but if you're not familiar with all this thing, the cure temperature and the exact temperature and the exact place where to put the signal and everything, then you're just like spinning your wheels.
yeah.
So I'm just going to leave it at that. It's up to the people to decide whether or not they want to pursue this.
Now, this picture here I consider very important, because all the light for this picture came from the lights connected to the energy machine.
So it's closed looping.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's providing the lights. The only thing you see there is energy for the vacuum. This is some of his high voltage stuff, and just, you know, I had no clue as to what he was trying to accomplish in any of this stuff here. I mean, I saw it, but what did it mean? There's some of the patterns he would get on the TV tube. And some of these are just coming right off of his oscillators he's got here, but he was kind of mixing oscillator stuff with signals from his machine, and he's displaying it on TV, and I don't know, just a puzzlement.